Okay, hello everybody. It's Mr. Schlissel, and today we're going to discuss some of the structures found in cells, in particular plant and animal cells, which both have eukaryotic structure. Remember, we've talked about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are very simple type of cells like bacteria, and eukaryotes are the cells that we probably are more familiar with, which like our animal, plant, fungi, and protists, which have all the specialized organelles inside them. And here's a uh, diagram with all those specialized structures labeled inside this animal cell. I like to think of these structures like the Golgi body and the rough ER. They're called organelles, and I like to think of them sort of like a automobile manufacturing plant because these organelles all have specialized jobs. And if you ever get to visit an automobile manufacturing plant, there are all different sections in that plant. You have the paint department and you have the electrical department, and each specific department has its job to do, and that's sort of the way the cell is designed as well. Each organelle has its own special job to do, and if it doesn't do it, then cells will not maintain homeostasis and could die. So it's very important that each cell do its specific job, just like an automobile plant has all the different parts working for the manufacture of a car. Now, let's move on. And I gave you in class this handout, which has a plant and animal cell. On one side is the plant cell. This is the plant cell. And on the other side is the animal cell. Let's label your plant cell right now. Now, you can see mine is already filled in. And what I'd like you to do is fill in your diagram. And you can pause the video if I'm going too fast. And then you can, you know, write down all the names of all the organelles in this plant cell. Look on the side, make sure you're labeling your plant cell, and then you can continue with the video once you have it all filled in. But I'll just run through the names. So number one on the plant cell is the cell wall, and number two is the cell membrane. Number three is the chloroplast. Number four is the mitochondrion. Number five is the nuclear membrane. Number six, I've labeled the nucleus. Seven is this dark structure inside the nucleus. It's referred to as the nucleolus. Number eight is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. That's a long word, so you can say rough ER. That's usually the way it's written in many textbooks. Nine is the ribosomes. 10 is the large central vacuole. And 11 is the Golgi body. Now you'll notice that I did number one, number three, and number 10 in green. And I did that because those structures are sort of unique to plant cells. Plant cells only have a cell wall. Plant cells only have chloroplasts, and plant cells have generally a very large vacuole. And so you might want to underline those or do them in a different color like I did as well. So we get to start to understand that there are some structures that are a little different between plant and animal cells. Now I'm going to turn my sheet over and I'm going to label the animal cell. And like I said, if you need to, pause it at this point and fill in your plant cell side and then follow me to the next animal cell. Okay, here we are. So number one is the cell membrane. Number two in this diagram is the mitochondria, the mighty mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Number three is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, or the smooth ER. Four is the lysosome. Five is the rough ER, and in this diagram they kind of pull out that organelle and put it on the side here as well. So here it is inside the cell, and here they put it on the side. It's kind of studded with number six, which are ribosomes. So you find ribosomes on the endoplasmic reticulum, and you also find ribosomes sort of free in the cytoplasm of the cell. Here's those little dots representing them in the cytoplasm, all inside the cell. Number seven is the nucleopores or nuclear holes. Number eight is the nucleolus. 9 is the cytoplasm, 10 is the nucleus itself, 11 is a vacuole, 12 is the nuclear membrane, and 13 are centrioles. Now in this diagram, I color-coded or made red the centrioles because that's a structure that's unique to animal cells. And so you might want to do that in a different color pen or pencil because we won't find centrioles in an animal cell, just like we won't find the cell wall or the chloroplast in plant cells. We'll never find that in an animal cell. So again, you can pause it and fill in your sheet and then continue to hit the play button when you're ready to go. First structure I want to talk about is the cell membrane. Now, in your notes, this is now the notes section of our assignment. I have written down the cell membrane and I have the same picture that you have on your notes. Now, if we look at the structure of the cell membrane, it's very complex. It's made of proteins, these thick globular substances, and here in red are protein molecules, and it's sort of like a double layer. And the layer here, these sort of circular structures with tails coming down from them, well, these are the lipids. Essentially, the cell membrane consists of a lipid and protein bilayer. And so let's fill in our notes with that. Proteins and lipids. And again, here are the lipids. Some go through the entire double layer, and some just sort of embed halfway. But in any event, they're proteins and lipids are what makes up the cell membrane. And on top, coming off of some of the proteins, are actually carbohydrate molecules, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the lipids and proteins are the most important part of the cell membrane. The cell membrane is referred to as selectively permeable, and what that means is it sort of controls what goes in and out of the cell. It allows certain molecules in and others it won't allow in. I like to think of it as sort of a security guard of the cell. And I'm going to just pull this picture away here for a moment. And I have this gate opening and closing. And that's sort of how I think of the cell membrane. The cell membrane will control what enters the cell and what leaves the cell. One of the characteristics that allow things to enter or leave the cell happens to be size. Size is very important. Small molecules can cross the membrane very easily, while big molecules have a hard time. Now, we've discussed in biochemistry, we discussed small molecules like glucose, and we've discussed large molecules like starch. And so starch would have a very difficult time crossing a cell membrane, but glucose being small would be easily transported through the membrane. And so that's why starch must be digested to be able to get into our cells, into its building blocks, which is glucose molecules. The other thing that's important in terms of what can enter and cross this selectively permeable cell membrane, sometimes we refer to it as things that are lipid soluble or that can dissolve in lipids. A good example of something that is lipid soluble is alcohol. When people drink alcohol, gets into their bloodstream very, very quickly. And that's because alcohol is lipid soluble. So they swallow it, it gets into their stomach, and boom, right into their bloodstream, and they feel the effects of it. So alcohol is a good example of something that is lipid soluble. It's not necessarily that small, but it can dissolve in this lipid fat bilayer. Now, I want to show you one thing about the cell membrane. So here's a little animation, and here's another picture of it. Here are the here are the protein molecules. Here's one going through both layers, and here's one just going halfway through. And here's the lipids. And I'm going to play this animation, and I want you to notice the molecules are moving. And that's really what's happening in the cell membrane. Molecules are in motion. The lipids are moving, the proteins are moving, and sometimes we refer to this as the fluid mosaic model. Mosaic meaning like a tile. In a way, the cell membrane, it looks like a sort of a tile finish. Everything's in place in certain locations, And fluid meaning it's moving. It has a lot of fluidity to it. And so the proteins and lipids are constantly in motion in the cell membrane. And that's why another term that's associated with the cell membrane is the fluid mosaic model. And on your notes, let's put down what that means. It means that those phospholipids and the embedded proteins that make up the cell membrane are in constant motion. And so we should just keep that in mind. And here again is the same picture that I have on your notes. Now the last thing I'm going to mention right now is this picture here. Okay, here's a hand-drawn picture that I made of the cell membrane. It's double layer here. Here's the top layer. Here's the bottom layer. Here's the embedded protein molecules. And here are the fatty acid tails. I also labeled the phosphate heads, so it's a phospholipid bilayer. What I would like you to do is draw this yourself. Bring this in on a separate sheet of paper. Let's label it cell membrane. Fill in your notes, everything up to the cell membrane, what we've covered so far. We haven't gotten that far into our notes, but we'll continue with this. But in addition, draw this picture out, label all the important parts like my diagram is. And I hope this was helpful, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.